Do you love the idea of blowing up artifacts for value? Then Zabaz might be the commander for you. Before we begin, just a reminder to subscribe for future deck techs. Zabaz reads, Zabaz the Glimmerwasp, 1-drop, 0/0, legendary artifact creature, insect, with modular 1. If a modular triggered ability would put one or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, that many +1/+1/+1 counters are put on it instead. 1 red, destroy target artifact you control. Pay 1 white, Zabaz the Glimmerwasp gains flying until end of turn. Because Zabaz has a red and white activated ability, it makes it a red and white commander. And modular is an ability that puts counters on a creature when it enters the battlefield, and when it kicks the bucket, it puts those counters on another non-token creature you control. Because of this, our deck is obviously going to run as many modular creatures as is reasonable, but we want only the best modular creatures, like Arcbound Javelineer. 1 white for a 0/1, modular 1, tap, remove X +1/+1 counters from Arcbound Javelineer. It deals X damage to target attacking or blocking creature. This modular creature isn't amazing, but it's still pretty solid. Any kind of repeatable removal we can get our hands on has the potential to gain us some real value throughout a game. Arcbound Shikari is a bit of a trap. While it is a 3-drop, you usually don't want to play it turn 3 since you won't have much of a board by that point. It's often better to wait until you have a decent board of artifacts before playing this to get as much value as possible. Arcbound Slith is a 2-drop 0/0 creature type Slith with modular 1. Whenever Arcbound Slith deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Arcbound Slith would be really good if it had evasion, but unfortunately, it doesn't. Even still, it's an okay modular card since it can put more counters on itself, even if it's not that efficient in doing so. Arcbound Whelp is a 4-drop 0/0 artifact creature dragon with modular 2. Flying, and pay 1 red, Arcbound Whelp gets +1/+0 until end of turn. We do love evasion here, plus the ability to pump with our remaining red mana is pretty sweet to get some extra sneaky damage through. Arcbound Overseer is an 8-drop 0/0 artifact creature golem with modular 6. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature with modular you control. This one should be pretty obvious why we play it. Putting counters on all of our modular creatures is a pretty sweet ability. Growing our board as the game goes on can benefit us greatly. You could run the other cards with modular, but in this take on the deck, I cut them for more Artifact Matters cards. Speaking of Artifact Matters cards, Bronze Guardian is a 5-drop X5 artifact creature golem with double strike and ward 2. Other artifacts you control have ward 2. Bronze Guardian's power is equal to the number of artifacts you control. Ward 2 is pretty sweet, giving it to all of our creatures is a pain in the neck for our opponents. Plus, Bronze Guardian having power equal to the number of artifacts we control can get out of hand really fast. Iron Soul Enforcer is a 5-mana 4/4 artifact creature human samurai. Whenever Iron Soul Enforcer or a commander you control attacks alone, return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Sometimes you need a single artifact back. Since we can give our commander flying for 1 white, this card allows us to return any artifact to our battlefield, which is great for key pieces we've lost throughout the game. Leonin Abunis is a 4-drop 2/5 cat cleric. Artifact creatures you control have hexproof. If our artifacts having ward was good, then them having hexproof is amazing. Not being able to target most of our board is a destroy on sight kind of card, meaning that removal isn't getting used on our other creatures. Loshiel Clockwork Scholar is a 3-mana 2/4 legendary creature Elephant Artificer. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to attacking artifact creatures you control. Whenever one or more artifacts enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. We are by and large an aggressive go-tall deck. We want our creatures on the battlefield fast and to swing in with them for a bunch of damage. Loshiel making it so we don't have to worry about them taking combat damage is super good. Plus the ability to draw us cards off of doing what this deck already wants to be doing is great. Mystic Forge is a 4-mana artifact. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may cast the top card of your library if it's an artifact card or a colorless non-land card. Tap, pay 1 life, exile the top card of your library. This card is pseudo card draw. We run a ton of artifacts in this deck, so some turns you get to play multiple cards off the top through Mystic Forge. Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle, is a 4-mana 2/2 legendary creature bird cleric with flying. It also has, whenever you cast a historic spell, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic. Teshar returning cards when we play historic spells is the whole reason they're here. And while it's great that legends and sagas are historic, we mostly care about the artifact part. Now you may have noticed with the modular ability, we're going to have a bunch of cards hitting the grave. Because of that, we want cards that synergize with artifacts in our graveyard, such as Goblin Engineer, a 2-drop 1/2 Goblin Artificer. When Goblin Engineer enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact card, put that card in your graveyard, then shuffle your library. It also has pay 1 red and tap, sacrifice an artifact, return target artifact with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Goblin Engineer is pretty good since we can turn our less relevant artifacts into ones we need from the grave. It's also a pseudo tutor card. Felden of the Third Path is a 3-mana 2/3 human artificer with pay 2 and a red, Create a token that's a copy of target creature card in your graveyard, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Feldon, on the other hand, can make a copy of any card in our graveyard, which is amazingly powerful. For 3 mana, you can get the biggest, best creature from our graveyard for a turn. Goblin Welder is a 1 mana 1/1 Goblin Artificer. Choose target artifact a player controls and target artifact card in that player's graveyard. If both targets are still legal as this ability resolves, that player simultaneously sacrifices the artifact and returns the artifact to the battlefield. Long story short, that means we can swap an artifact on our field for an artifact from our grave. Everything we liked about Goblin Engineer's ability to return artifacts from the battlefield is here, but better. Without a restriction on converted mana cost of the creature, we can trade out a 1-drop for a 6-drop. What more needs to be said? Scrap Trawler is a 3 mana 3/2 construct. Whenever Scrap Trawler or another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand target artifact card in your graveyard with less mana value. This will let us get our artifacts back to our hand when we get rid of our bigger cards. Also, all of our X-costed cards CMC is 0, which will be relevant later when we talk about the X-costed cards. But know that you can get them back no matter what you sacrifice unless it's another X-mana card. Pia's Revolution is 2 and a red for an enchantment. Whenever a non-token artifact is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return that card to your hand unless target opponent has Pia's Revolution deal 3 damage to him or her. Pia's Revolution is a solid choice to keep artifacts in our hand turn after turn. It is pretty easy to shut down since our opponents start with 40 life, but that's 3 less damage we need to do through combat. The Ozolith is a 1 mana legendary artifact. Whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. This is one of our emergency cards. When we get board wiped, we get to keep all of the counters we've been storing up on a single card and can redeploy threats to make it giant when it rolls back around to our turn. With that in mind, counters are a very important part of how this deck functions. So the following cards are great inclusions. Lae'zel, Vlaakith's Champion, is a 3 mana 3/3 Gith Warrior. If you would put 1 or more counters on a creature or planeswalker you control, or on yourself, put that many +1 of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. Choose a background, which isn't relevant here. This card functions in a very similar vein to our commander, but instead of just modular, cares about any counters we may use. Redundancy of effects is great. Abzan Falconer is a 3 mana 2/3 human soldier with Outlast, and more importantly, each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has flying. This gives some of our creatures evasion for 3 mana, worthwhile inclusion to make sure we can actually get some damage in. Mindless Automaton is a 4 mana 0/0 construct. Mindless Automaton enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Pay 1, discard a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Mindless Automaton, and remove 2 +1/+1 counters from Mindless Automaton, draw a card. This card can put counters on itself, but we generally want to avoid getting counters on it that way and rely on our other effects to do that. The card draw at instant speed is pretty sweet, and don't forget, if you're staring down a board wipe, you can activate this as many times as you have counters for to fill your hand to rebuild. Gather's Crusade is a 5 mana enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. We play creatures. We want those creatures to have +1/+1 counters on them. Gather's Crusade takes what we already want to be doing and does it just a little better. Together Forever is a white enchantment. Whenever Together Forever enters the battlefield, support 2. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. Pay 1, choose target creature with a counter on it. When that creature dies this turn, return that card to its owner's hand. Support 2 is alright. We generally don't mind getting a few extra counters around our board. But the big thing is being able to get our creatures with counters back. With modular, this can get out of hand pretty fast. Throne of Geth is a 2 mana artifact. Tap, sacrifice an artifact, proliferate. Choose any number of permanents and or players, then give each another counter of each kind already there. So all of our creatures with +1/+1 counters get an extra +1/+1 counter. We like sacrificing artifacts. Check. We want to get more counters. Check. This card just seems straight up good to me. Steel Overseer is a 2 mana 1/1 construct. Tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each artifact creature you control. This card is amazing early so we can really beef up our board, but it's still great even in the later parts of the game. A repeatable version of this kind of effect is Bananas, so this is an easy auto-include. Another thing this deck can do with these counters is super beef up our X-costed cards. Hangerback Walker is an XX 0/0 construct. Hangerback Walker enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. When Hangerback Walker dies, put a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying onto the battlefield for each +1/+1 counter on Hangerback Walker. And Pay 1, tap, put a +1/+1 counter on Hangerback Walker. A card that can turn into an army when it kicks the bucket is great. The fact that the army's size is based on how big Hangerback Walker was is even better. Walking Ballista is an XX00 creature type construct. Walking Ballista enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. Pay 4, put a +1/+1 counter on Walking Ballista. Remove a +1/+1 counter from Walking Ballista, it deals 1 damage to any target. I could argue this is one of the most powerful cards in the entire deck. Sometimes you just sacrifice all of your modular creatures, put all of the counters on this, and instant speed take out your opponent. Walking Ballista ruins lives and friendships, and I'm here for it. Stone Coral Serpent is an X mana 0/0 creature type snake with reach, trample, and protection from multicolor. Stone Coil Serpent enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. This is a little lackluster compared to the last two, but it's still a great inclusion that can really punish people for running a bunch of multicolored creatures or multicolored removal. We're going to lose a lot of creatures throughout the game. Sometimes it's a good thing, and other times it's because an opponent just wiped the board. Since we're an aggressive deck in white and red, drawing cards and rebuilding isn't really in our wheelhouse. Because of that, we just run cards to bring back all of our artifacts, such as Scrap Mastery. 3 red for sorcery. Each player exiles all artifact cards from his or her graveyard, then sacrifices all artifacts he or she controls, then puts all cards he or she exiled this way onto the battlefield. This equates to take all of your artifacts on your field and all of your artifacts in your grave and swap them. This is great because it gets rid of our opponent's mono rocks, and in doing so, most of their ramp oftentimes. We also get to rebuild our board in a single card. Just be careful because this does let your opponents get their artifacts back as well. Brilliant Restoration is 3 white sorcery. Return all artifact and enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. This card is amazing other than the cost. 4 white isn't impossible to hit, but it isn't guaranteed either. Given that we only run 10 planes in this version of the deck, I think this card is too strong not to include, but I could see an argument for switching it out with something else. You know what card's better? Wake the Past. 5 mana, red-white, sorcery. Return all artifact cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. They gain haste until end of turn. Now this is what we're looking for. Get our artifacts back, and they get haste. This is amazing, and I'm so glad they printed it. And that's it. That's the deck. Do you have any cool inclusions or other versions of this deck? If so, leave them in the comments below. If you enjoy my videos, consider subscribing to my Patreon. But if you can't subscribe to Patreon, a normal subscription here on YouTube still means the world to me. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful day.